Editor here. There were some technical difficulties with recording at the beginning of this panel, and the only thing that is missing is the premise of the talk and most of the presenters introducing themselves. So we'll pick up right there.
I'm also the lead developer of Lock.zip Studios. You may have seen my panel earlier in the week. In addition to my other responsibilities there, I've also been responsible for most of the Worldgen in those projects on our videos until recently when I started teaching the rest of the development team how to do Worldgen. So I have some experience with teaching as well as doing. So let's dive in and explore a little bit, find what custom world gen actually is. So custom world gen can mean a lot of things. It can be all encompassing and it can be something very specific. Of course, you can make an entirely custom dimension or overwrite an existing vanilla dimension. You can also create just simple features that might be displayed or generated with commands that can be used for a variety of more dynamic things, whether post-gen or custom items or what have you. You can overwrite just a vanilla biome or even add a overworld, though not without some work. And there's a lot more kind of interconnectedness and different applications of smaller features of world gen that you can take advantage of. Custom structures are also a subtopic of custom world generation. They're sort of their own can of worms that we're not going to dive into here. This is primarily focused on the terrain and the features and the biomes that make up custom world gen. But if you want to learn about custom structures, there are resources for that as well. Generally, at a lot of the same places that you can find resources on WorldGen. And I will pass it over to Jacob here.
Yeah, so we'll start with a small introduction into some tips and tools that you will have to keep in mind when developing WorldGen database. And the most important thing is that the /reload command doesn't work. Most of you may be familiar with the /reload command from the function files or from advancements, but for anything that's more recent than that, basically, so WorldGen and enchantments and everything like that, /reload doesn't work. So you always have to close the world and reopen it for it to take effect. And for WorldGen specifically, there's also the problem that, like, obviously you need new chunks to generate to see the changes that you've done to your data pack. The easiest way is, of course, to just explore new chunks, fly somewhere else, and see what's going on. The problem with that is, of course, that you don't see, like, you don't have a direct comparison what could change now, change the world because you're looking at different terrain. The second option is to create a new world every time you want to see a change. It's also pretty annoying, and always you want to use the same seed every time. The third option is to go into your world folder and deleting the regions folder. So next time you open it, new chunks generate. All of these options are rather annoying. It really slows down the development because every time you make a change, you want to see what the effect is. You have to wait like quite a long time for a new world to generate. There is a solution to all of these, and that is my mod watch and DevTools that you can download from Modrin, for example. And the most important thing it does is that it allows /reload for everything, basically. It's a bit buggy. It's sometimes might crash your world, might corrupt your world, so you really shouldn't use it on any world that you care about. But in this case, we're talking about a test world that you just generate to see how your world works. So that's totally fine if your world corrupts from time to time, and it saves you a lot of time. And the second thing it does is /reset chunks command that is pretty fast, and you can just regenerate a whole set of chunks without ever leaving your world. And that really helps speed up the development. That not also includes a lot of other quality of life things, but you can check them out yourself. The next tool that is really important to see is methods generator. So method.gitlab.ai. Many of you probably have heard of that already. Basically, it's a visual editor for all of these JSON files, and you can only fill out fields that exist, and you can't make any errors in the JSON format, so to speak. That tool also has some visualization. So here you can, for example, see that you're directly visualizing a biome layout. And the last tool or resource that's really important is the Minecraft Wiki. The new one, not the Phantom one, obviously. So basically, since the fall, we've done a lot of work to refine what is on there, and basically all Worldgen files are documented properly on the wiki. If you search them, maybe a bit hard to find on the wiki, but if you search them, you can find them certainly. Right. The last tool, and that's another tool by myself, is Snowcapped. We'll get back to why that's important later, but basically it's a tool that allows you to modify biome layouts like the vanilla overworld one, which is rather complex. And if you want to see, have an introduction into how Snowcapped works, I have a panel on that on Thursday at 8 p.m. UTC. So if you want to learn more about biome layouts and Snowcapped in particular, I'd be happy to see you all there. But we'll continue with the way of how to start.
Okay. And now, all of you have come here. A lot of people learning about Worldgen are excited, saying, "Well, I've always been complicated. Worldgen's always been complicated to me, and I've always wanted to know." So you come here, and you've got the beautiful tutorial set up for you. We had a great introduction, and you now have a bunch of tools you can use. But that's a lot of tools, and there is still a lot of stuff. So where are you going to even start with Worldgen? So that's what we'll try to figure out now. So first thing to know is, to do Worldgen, you'll need to know a little bit of basic data pack stuff. Over here, we have a screenshot of Visual Studio Code. Don't think it was directly mentioned, but it is the most popular editing software you use for data packs in general. It has a lot of other extensions and tooling compatibilities, some of them that work with what Jacob mentioned before. But when you open up your favorite Worldgen pack and you go here, this is probably what it'll look like. You open up Terralith, whether it be Geophilic, New in Town Dimensions, just any of your favorite Worldgen packs. You'll have this folder structure. And there's a lot of stuff. Every folder does something different. And we'll start to go over each of them now. So first of all, you have the dimension. The dimension is almost like the brain of a Worldgen data pack. It's going to say, hey, which biomes are going to generate and where? And if you open up, for example, Terralith, you open up that file, you'll see that it has 50,000 lines, 100,000 lines. It's a very big file. And that's why we use some of the tools that Jacob was talking about. But it looks very, very complicated, but it only does two things. Two mainly things. One, it references the dimension type, which we'll get to in a second. And the second part is it tells you where all the biomes generate. It's not saying, hey, I want this biome to be a hot biome. I want this biome to be a mountain biome. No, there's a bit more complicated things to this. We'll talk about it more later, but there's a lot of parameters to mess with, and you can reference biomes multiple times. The next file type is the dimension type. You can think of this as the settings of your Worldgen data pack. It's kind of random things, almost like the game rules of Worldgen, saying, hey, I want to say, in this dimension, there'll be a ceiling. In this dimension, there'll be a floor. So, for example, the Nether has a ceiling. You'll determine it there. Or maybe I want to say, I want water to evaporate in this dimension. I want beds and respawn anchors to work or blow up in this dimension. So it's like the game rules. You have the most random stuff you can control, and you can set them as you want. The next part is settings. This one is also a little bit one of the more complicated files. You determine this is how the terrain is going to look in the world. You can say this is a shape, this is the type of noise I want to use. Also, this is where you'll find the surface rules. I say which blocks are going to make up each of the dimension. There is a lot to unpack here, and we will discuss more about it later. But the next one is noise. This will also be discussed. It's more of a bunch of math of determining which numbers to use for calculations of placing things in the world. Then we have the biome. The biome is what it sounds like. That's what the biome is. Say, hey, what is my biome called? What color do I want the water to be? Maybe I want the leaves to be purple. And hey, which mobs do I want to spawn in there? Which trees do I want to spawn? And we'll discuss more about that later. And then finally, we have the placed and configured features. These two go along very closely. You can almost consider them the same thing. A placed feature determines, hey, where in the world is this going to be placed? And a configured feature is what does it do? So I could say for a placed feature, I want this to be placed 4 times per chunk randomly, and then the configured feature says I want this to be a tree with this tall of a trunk and these amount of leaves. Quick introduction to theirs, and next slide. And this is kind of the tree to see how everything connects to each other. So as I mentioned before, the dimension is the brain. It's the where everything starts with. The dimension type is on the side, but then you have the biome layout and the biomes with the features that come after that, and then the noise, density functions, and noise settings. And then to start off, we will talk about biomes, which is the bread and butter of many data packs. So there are a lot of things you can control with the biomes. Obviously, hey, do I want this to rain? Do I want it to snow? Do I want it to not rain at all? You can determine the colors for almost everything you can think of. The grass, the foliage, sky, fog, water, and the water fog. One thing to consider is, and this is a very annoying fact that can be helpful when determining foliage colors, is some things are still hard-coded. Many leaves you can control the colors of, but some of them you cannot. So this is, if you really want to use an azalea leaf, for example, you wouldn't be able to color code that one. It will stay that same light green, but on the other hand, this allows you to have 2 different leaf colors in your biome. There's many people in the chat will help me out on this one with the exact ones that are hard-coded and not, but there are many of them. Next of them is particles you can decide, and you can determine, hey, what particle I want, how busy do I want it to be, and you can have fun with that. Music as well. There you can control like the normal like cave sounds you hear when you're caving, or just the music. And in the latest snapshot that came out 4 or 5 days ago, last Wednesday, we now can control multiple musics per biome. You can control when I want a music to play, if it fades out, fades in, and all the volume, all this. There's a many to control with the music now, and maybe more soon. We'll see. And then, of course, you have the mobs you can spawn, and some different cave and carver types. Features, it's like a biome by itself, it's just going to be whatever terrain you selected. It's where you decide it, which terrain, that's it. By itself, mobs will spawn, and that's it. If you want it to make it look pretty, well, you want some trees, you want some grass, maybe some rocks, maybe you want some other things in your biome to really make it feel alive. This is where the features come in. You can all the trees you want, all the flowers, and not just below there, and not just on the surface, but below ground. You can control if geodes spawn, which ores, and there's so many more. I highly recommend, if you're just curious to see what there is to just look at the Minecraft wiki. It's a great resource. yes, it's complicated to learn from it, but just to look at what there is, it's great. You can go to the placed feature and configured feature pages, and it just has a list of all the options, and it'll say this is what vanilla uses it for. So, what does the multi-face growth feature do? And it'll show you, it's used to place some vines and some caves, and it's great. And there's so much more. But features, as great as they are, they do have limitations. First of all is performance. They can be quite laggy, because you can determine where they place. In Terralith, we used to have a feature that would place, I would think it was many, many thousand times per chunk. Apollo's got the number 65,000 times per chunk. And understandably, this sounds like a big number. It's laggy. It can get bigger, and there are ways to optimize it. But you have to be careful. You can't just place features as you want. It will get laggy. You can place a lot of features, and sometimes they just don't work. But the other issue is some features don't always do what you want to do. One example that has come up recently when we're talking about Terralith development is the multi-face growth feature. It's a great thing. It's a great way to place some glow lichen and some skulk veins in wherever you want. In Terralith, we were hoping that, maybe we can use it to place some new blocks because we liked how it looked and placed. But no, that feature, it is currently hard-coded to be only glow lichen and skulk vein, unless something's changed in the snapshot that I can't remember. But there's a lot of other features that are hard-coded to what you can't use as you want. But there are a lot of features. Most of the things you can do are able to be used. And some of them you can abuse, but that's what we have. And how are these made? I did mention this a bit at the beginning when I was going over the introduction of everything, but first of all, you have the place feature. It is made of two parts, the configured feature and the placement. Say, hey, where do I want to place this? One of the more common things is to say, I want to place this 16 times per chunk. Then you'll just say, I want to randomize it, so it's not in a perfect grid or always at 0, 0 in the chunk. And then you have more methods. I say, hey, I want to place this in the sky. I want to place this onto the surface. I want to place this below ground. And there are a lot of different ways you can determine where it's placed. If you want to be fancy, you can say, I want to reference some noise so it looks more natural other than just randomized. There's much more to that. And then also, you have the configured feature. This can either be a separate file or it can be inlined inside of the place feature. It does not matter what you do. Some people prefer one, some more cleaner to read. Just whatever keeps your sanity the most intact, which is very important for Worldgen. You should keep your sanity. For the configured feature, that's what is going to be placed in the world. Say, is it going to be a tree? Which blocks are going to be used? Is it going to be a blob? Is it going to be a vegetation patch? Is it going to be a geode that we morph into somehow being a floating sky island? How is this going to be? So many different things you can do, and you can have weighted lists, you can have everything. Again, I always recommend to look at the Minecraft wiki. See what there is. What does vanilla use? Or open your favorite Worldgen data pack. Say, hey, I really love how Terralith does the cherry trees in the Snake Grove. I'm going to pull up that tree and see how they do it. Or maybe, and just have fun. See what there is. It's one of the best ways is to learn, is to just open up a pack, see how they do it. And configured features, talked a bit about that, but yeah, as I said, the wiki, I've mentioned the wiki many, many times. It's a beautiful resource. But Miso's generators is also for no way, if you look at the world data packs, there is so much space on. None of the Worldgen developers write all this JSON, and we all use the tool. They're you don't have to memorize every single field. There are hundreds of fields, and you methods tool to decide what you want to place it, to do the work for you. It's just clicking to block sequence. That's all you have to worry about. Placers. I've mostly talked to this already. I'm getting ahead of myself in the slides, but yeah, some are hard-coded, but you can live things and use the tools. But I will pass the microphone on to Kano about the fundamentals of terrain. But before you, are there any quick questions about biomes and features? As a reminder, questions panel, but most of the things we will do afterwards.
I do see a question in the doc that I think I'm in a unique position to answer. They think about analogs of biome as a concept, as it's understood in Minecraft. They used to work quite differently. What do you think, for example, about separating the contents of a biome from the biome itself? And this is actually very similar to how Bedrock handles its worldgen, or will handle its worldgen. It's still an experimental feature over there as well, but their features are not necessarily defined in their biome file. Instead, biomes are given tags, and then their analog for placed features can reference those tags in that biome. And this obviously has some clear advantages. You can add features to vanilla biomes. Multiple packs, rather, can add features to vanilla biomes without having to override each other. But if you want to, for example, add a new sort of tag to biomes for your own special set of features that you want to appear in a set of biomes that are not necessarily connected to each other any other way, don't share any other similar tags, then you still need to overwrite those. So there are advantages to that kind of system, and there's a world where maybe Java gets something a little closer to that, at least as an option. But it really is a 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, I think.
To add to that, I would like to point out that the place features that you reference in the biome files are actually place feature tags in Java. Nobody uses that because Mojang doesn't use it, but you can use those, and if everyone would, then we wouldn't have this compatibility issue. So yeah, maybe something to keep in mind for the future.
So we're going to talk next about the fundamentals of terrain. So terrain is primarily handled in the noise settings file. This file is responsible for the base block that the terrain is made of. So for the overworld, that's stone. For the nether, that's netherrack. Also controls the base fluid, water, lava. Technically doesn't have to be a fluid. Same for the base block, doesn't have to be solid. But most of the time, there's little reason you wouldn't do that. The noise settings does also control some global settings that you would think would belong to the dimension type that we'll get to later, but are actually controlled here. Primarily whether creatures, which are passive mobs, will spawn during chunk generation. Doesn't control whether they spawn at all, just when new chunks get generated or not. Also controls the valid parameters for the initial spawn point if you're modifying the overworld. This is also where you can control the large copper and iron ore vein generation and aquifer generation, which does also play into cave floodedness. I won't get into a lot of detail there, but something important to keep in mind if you're messing with terrain and aquifers in particular. The noise router is one section of the noise settings, which is where a lot of the specifics of terrain gets handled. Surface rules is another section where, like I mentioned earlier, we'll kind of handle the what blocks are making up the dimension or even biome. That all gets defined here. The noise settings is also where you define the sea level. And a good note there, the sea level also directly relates to the lava flood level. So with the sea level at Y63, the lava flood level will always be at minus 54. So if you try to make the overworld, minus 128 as the bottom of the world instead of minus 64, that lava level is going to stay exact. So all that new terrain, all those new caves you added are going to be flooded with lava if you don't modify that sea level. So something to keep in mind. So let's talk more about the noise router in specific. So the noise router handles several features even just within the noise settings file. Specifically, this is what handles whether any given block is the default block, so that's stone or netherrack or air, or the default fluid with respect to sea level or aquifers. It's also where you configure aquifers specifically, primarily just whether they existed or where they generate in the world, and whether they are lava or the default fluid. It's also where you can configure large ore veins, but only their shape, their size, their location, and whether they are iron or copper under certain conditions. You can't change them to be anything other than iron or copper. And also the parameters that get used elsewhere to define biome distribution, which we'll get to a little bit more later in the presentation. All of the fields here in the noise router are what are called density functions. They can be written in line here, or you can make them separate JSON files in the density function folder and reference them here. And there's pros and cons to doing either and how they get used. Talking a bit about some of the specific density functions that are in the noise router. Final density is probably one of the most important ones. This is the density function that will actually define the bulk of the terrain. Controls the shape of the surface, whether it's a mountain that stretches up to Y128 or the oceans that stretch down to 40, 30. But it also controls the large noise caves and the noodle caves that were introduced in the Caves and Cliffs update. Those are baked into the terrain, unlike the older legacy caves that are closer to a biome feature. The initial density without jaggedness density function is closely related to final density. It doesn't control terrain itself, but is used by the aquifers and can be used by surface rules to help just kind of simplify and determine where the surface of the terrain is, so that they can more accurately and more performantly affect the blocks and the parts of the world that they are intended to. So typically this is going to be very similar to your final density function, but a little bit lower in elevation. After that, we have the vegetation, ridges, continents, erosion, and depth densities. These are all technically very similar, at least in their construction, but they differ a little bit in how they can be used. And we're going to talk primarily about how the overworld uses them, but just keep in mind that these can be used all kind of interchangeably. It really depends on how you opt to use them. But for the overworld, temperature and vegetation in particular are pretty much just noise maps. Really, they all are noise maps. And vegetation in particular are just generate basic noise maps that biomes can get placed relative to. It's the ridges, continents, erosion, and depth density functions that actually get referenced by final density to control the shape of the terrain. And the reason that they are referenced in that way is so that when you get to biome placement, biome distribution, you can place your biomes with respect to where those terrain changes are. So like Katter alluded to earlier, you can't just say, oh, I want this mountain to be a mountain biome. You have to kind of bake that mountain terrain into the final density and also into the, for example, continents and erosion noise density functions in the noise router so that those parameters can be referenced later on by the biome distribution. We're going to get into a lot more detail on how that works in the biome distribution section, but just know that these parameters don't affect terrain, but they are useful for biome placement. So what actually is a density function? So density functions are basically just formulas. They can be a variable length, variable complexity. They can have numerous outputs. They can have numerous inputs. They can have no inputs. But as or constant, or even as the output from a later density function, and often some noise, which you can define in a noise file. We're not going to get into a lot of detail on that. That's more advanced stuff that you really only need when you're getting really deep into the weeds on this kind of thing. But density functions, at the end of the day, is just math, just fairly complex math when you start to chain it together like this. For final density specifically, values of 0 or less that get calculated by the density function, by the final density function, become air or the default fluid with respect to the sea level. And values that are greater than 0 become that default block, that stone or netherrack. To give a little bit of context, the vanilla overworld's final density function is about 139 lines long. A little hard to see here zoomed out and at this resolution, but obviously some of those lines, especially down at the bottom, are just opening and closing brackets. But you see there's quite a lot of content there, and you can kind of see how they flow in a chain. So, the furthest down density functions become the inputs for the density function higher up, and that's how you end up getting terrain That looks vaguely like this. This is the vanilla overworld's final density function plugged into my sodes generator to give you a 2D slice of what that ends up looking like. So we have the color code here to really demonstrate that those values that are 0 or less are air. So you see most of the area above the very obvious surface where you see those much darker blues is yellow, very obviously air. But even the gradient of green right above the surface, all that's air. The reason it's gradient is mostly just to the way the math happened to work out to be able to get this nice divide once we get to the greater than 0 values that then also become a gradient. But we also see really obviously these green blobs kind of underneath the main surface, or the top surface of the terrain. And those are obviously the noise caves, which again are baked into the final density, baked into the terrain. I'm going to hand it over to Catter to cover surface rules.
Surface rules. Thank you for that, Kano. Well, we were waiting for me. Surface rules. This is, how is the world supposed to look like? Obviously, you have the biomes, and that determines what trees get spawned, what grass, which are your favorite flower, what flowers are going to be placed in the dimension. But what are those trees going to be placed on? Is it going to be a grass block? Is it going to be dirt? Is it going to be stone for the mountains? Or are your mountains going to be made with a terrible choice like netherrack or something? This surface rules are what determine that. It determines what's going to be placed on the surface. It's going to be what gets placed under the water. It also determines the bedrock floors. Have you ever been curious on why the bedrock has that, like, gradients into a solid layer from, what was it, y minus 60 to y 64? Surface rules. It also determines when deep slate starts. Many things. But surface rules can be complicated. If you look at the file, it's not as long as the dimension file, where I said like 50,000, 100,000 lines, but they can get long depending on how complex. If you look at them, you first of all, some of the basic things are, you just say, okay, which biome are we going to attack first? And what are we going to do with it? Are we going to cover the ground of the biome? Are we going to cover the ground underneath the water in that biome? There are many combinations you can do. Or what Y level is it going to be? Is it going to be Y above Y97? Or are you going to say, oh, only place a block here if the block underneath it is another block? You have all these rules, and because of JSON is very verbose, the files can get very long. And this is why as many of us have said, all of us have said several times, no one will ever create these by hand. It is very painful. So we all use tools to do that. No one wants to write, it's so blurry, but I think that says 62 lines of JSON for just to simply place some coarse dirt in wooded badlands. That's all it does, but 62 lines. So they're complicated, but there are many things you can do with them. There we go. Many combinations, and I always recommend looking at the wiki and checking out the tools. And I'll hand it over to Jacob to talk about the biome source.
All right, so this is basically the last big piece in the puzzle. So we've talked about terrain, how to generate terrain, how to build the surfaces, but we also know how to actually create biomes. I had that at the beginning. So the last big step now is to tell the game where to place which biome. First, let's talk about this dimension file. We already seen, Kata already described in the beginning that that's basically the main file because it references the noise settings we've talked about. It also references the dimension type, these game rules for Worldgen. And have a slide on those at the end. And the main other thing it references, or it doesn't reference, it actually includes inline, is biome source. And it's a bit unfortunate that the biome source has to be written directly into the dimension file, but it is how it is. Basically, we want to tell the game where to place which biome depending on these 6 inputs. Well, let's actually go back to the slide. Based on these 6 inputs, temperature, humidity, contaminants, erosion, weirdness, depth, that we have defined in the noise settings. So to do that, there are basically two ways. Either we do it the nether way, so the way vanilla nether works, which is basically just 5 biomes, and we use 2 of those and use different values, and then whichever value combination we set closest, that biome gets picked by the game. The other option is the way the overworld works, and the overworld defines which biome to pick for each combination of these 6 values directly. For each combination, there is one biome specifically defined to generate that. And as you can see, the vanilla file takes 200,000 lines to do that. Obviously, nobody will want to edit that manually, not even with Search Generator. That's completely impossible. So if you want to add a biome to the overworld, just manually impossible. Or if you want to tweak how they generate, impossible. Or if you want to have a custom dimension with similar complexity, so biomes that depend on the terrain, basically impossible to do manually. So that's where Snowcapped comes in. So you can use my Snowcapped editor to modify and create your own biome layouts. But I won't get into more detail than that because it's my separate panel for that on Thursday. But anyways, in case you want to do it the nether way and just have a couple biomes and place them randomly, basically, this is how you're going to do it. So for each biome, you define a set of parameters, and these match the ones from the noise settings on the noise router, except they're not always named the same way. So you can see the equivalence here. The richest from a noise router is called weirdness in the biome source. Continents is continentalness. Vegetation is called humidity. Then don't ask why. It's just what it is. And then you have the separate offset one, which is basically, you can think of it as another input that's always 0. So if you want to make the biome smaller than everyone else, you can just increase the offset a bit, and then the biome will get smaller. As we've said before, all these 6 inputs from the noise settings are completely excellent. That to give you a slight idea, I will basically already covered this, but temperature and humidity are 2 of the inputs from the noise settings, and you can place biomes depending on it. They don't affect anything other than placement. So don't confuse these with the temperature you set in the biome, which controls snow falling and stuff like that. This is just for placement. Offset already covered. Continentalness in vanilla. In the vanilla terrain, high continentalness is inland terrain. Low continentalness, so negative values, is ocean, and if you get very low, you eventually get on mushroom islands. For erosion, high erosion is flat terrain, and low erosion is mountainous terrain. And this depth is the only one in vanilla that depends on your Y level. So depth 0 is at the surface, and depth 1 is like 128 blocks below that. So you can use the depth to place biomes underground, so for cave biomes, basically. So yeah, that was biome sources. And let's get back to something a lot simpler. The dimension type, that's the very last slide, basically. We already talked about this. These are the game rules for Worldgen. Yeah, most of these are self-explanatory. I don't know if you can read them. I think you can. Yeah, most of these are self-explanatory, but some aren't. Like, check the wiki to see if what you're changing actually does what you think it does, because sometimes it's a bit surprising what these do, basically.
And with that, congratulations. You now, in theory, have all of the tools and information you need to be able to make your own Worldgen pack and your own custom dimension, terrain, biomes. Obviously, though, Worldgen is always a learning experience. We did not go into as I said at the top, all of the details and all of the, everything that you could possibly do, methodology, ways to use density functions. There are other resources for that we just don't have the time to cover here. And so custom Worldgen should always be considered a learning process. As we saw here, even while presenting this panel, we all learned things that we did not know going into writing this presentation. Every time we're experimenting with new Worldgen, we're learning something new about how vanilla behaves, how a feature behaves, or a new method to do something that was previously impossible or very challenging, or very bad. And so never feel like you are foolish or missing something when you can't figure something out for Worldgen. There are resources that you can go and find, and hopefully this has served as a great starting point for you to locate those resources and know where to go. Obviously, like I mentioned, one of the official helpers on DataPack Hub, and so I answer lots of Worldgen questions there every day, every week, and so that's a great place to go if you need specific help. Stardust Labs Discord also has a Worldgen dev channel where I know great Worldgen developers like Apollo are there and always happy to answer any random question. How does vanilla do this? How does this Worldgen DataPack do this? And so especially for much more of the technical methodology aspect, that's a great place to go. And then, like I said, on Planet Minecraft, if you go to the DataPack Hub group account, that's where you can find my documentation about custom Worldgen that also serves as a great reference and starting point from which you can go and find the other resources that we've talked about here today. And with that, we will go into question and answer. So we have some questions that have built up. Kater and Jacob, feel free to jump in with one you feel strongly about, and we'll continue to collect questions for these next 9 minutes or so.
Quick easy one that I see is if temperature from the noise router, the same temperature that controls things like snow. Fun fact about that, names mean nothing. There are two temperatures. There is the one that you have inside the biome file, and that controls whether like rain will be snow and some other stuff like that. And then you have the name we call a temperature in the noise router, and that is controlling. But the thing is, the names, we call them temperature, we call them humidity, weirdness, continentalis, but in reality, they mean nothing. You can set them to be whatever you want. They're just templates for you to use. If you don't care about temperature, you can call it something else and base your biome placement on that.
It's a 3D visualization tool for Worldgen. I'd say that tool is called Minecraft. I don't think, so it doesn't really make sense to completely copy Minecraft Worldgen and then create it in 3D. The easiest way, or the fastest way to do it, is to just generate the world in Minecraft. If you want to just see one part of it, for example, just the terrain, and you don't care about biomes yet, then either just don't do biomes, just have a single biome in your biome source and do terrain first. Or my Worldgen DevTools mod also has some game rules that you can disable biome generation, basically. So it's a bit faster to generate just terrain, so you can take time with biome generation.
I see a question here that we collected. When vanilla boasts files that are 50,000, 200,000 lines long, is it expected that vanilla generates these biomes, or are these handwritten? And the truth is that we don't know whether these were handwritten or generated with some kind of internal tool by Mojang. They are already, pre-written in the vanilla data pack. What was that, Jacob?
The dimension file is definitely generated, and we have the generation code in the vanilla files. Mojang is kind enough to actually include all the data generations in the published client, even though it's not actually used. Although for the dimension file, fun fact, the dimension file isn't actually used in the vanilla data pack. Because it's so long and they don't want to load it every time, they use some shortcuts and directly put it into the game. Yeah. And,
Now, I will say,
yeah, basically that generation code is what inspired me to create Snowcapped. So it's basically a very similar thing, just with the UI.
I will say with that though, even though they did, it is generated and was generated, Mo Yang and Henrik Nyberg in particular spent still several months, perfecting it. If anyone was around during the Caves and Cliff update snapshots, they were collecting tons and tons of data and feedback from players when they were finding these little pocket biomes or mountain biomes generating where there were no mountains, deserts generating in the middle of plains. And so even still, there was a lot of manual work to get the generation output the way that they wanted. Let's see, looking through the folder here.
What methods do you use to control the spread and distribution of biomes when introducing a new one? It's difficult. Even Worldgen doesn't really know how to do that. As you've clearly seen with the new Bay Garden biome, that's very weirdly placed and very rare and small often. If you want to add a lot of new biomes, you're going to have to basically create a new biome layout. And I'll get into how to actually do proper biome layouts in my panel, because that's basically always done with Snowcapped. Yeah, basically just lots of trial and error.
Yeah, we'll probably save a lot of biome layout questions for Jacob's panel, not only because that's a lot of things that are more possible with Snowcat, but also I imagine he'll go into much more detail than we were able to here, since we had to cover so much else too. I see a good question here. In your opinion, what's the best smaller project ideas to get started with Worldgen from a complete beginner? And I would say always, always, always a custom dimension. Rather than trying to add a new biome or modify or do anything to the overworld, the vanilla dimensions, obviously you can still overwrite them, and that's functionally the same thing as a custom dimension. But making your own custom dimension is really going to force you to utilize a lot of files while also allow you to maintain a scope. If you make your own custom dimension that has maybe only one biome, maybe only 3 biomes, like Jacob said, you place them like the Nether, maybe only at all or at first, and only use the temperature and humidity noise parameters to place them, then that'll give you a lot of practice with those general concepts and force you to learn, dimension file, noise settings file to get the terrain that you want. You can make very simple terrain instead of having to worry about adding mountains and oceans and rivers that you then have to, in theory, make your biomes conform to. You can make something that's a little bit more simple, a little more consistent across the dimension with a very small idea that still lets you practice all the different aspects that make up Worldgen. I see a small question here. Is it possible to generate your custom dimension with a specific seed separately from the seed of the overworld? I don't believe that it is. It used to be the seed was hard-coded when Worldgen was initially introduced, and we didn't have different seeds for every world that you loaded the data pack in. It would be the same seed every time if it was a custom dimension. But these days now that the custom dimension seed is tied to that overworld seed, it's just the same across the whole, play world, the save file.
And if by the question you mean that you want your dimension to basically use a different seed to the overworld, so it doesn't look identical, the solution is to use completely different noises. If you create a new noise, it will use a different seed, and if you then create density functions from that noise, you will have different density functions. Your dimension will not look identical to the overworld of the same seed.
Yeah, the seed is really just what determines what randomness the noise settings and the density functions are all using. So seed has nothing to do strictly with what terrain is used in a dimension. That's handled by the noise settings file.
All right. I think we've reached the 1 hour mark, but I might leave you a couple minutes, 1 minute extra to answer your final question one. And then we'll wrap up this amazing and beautiful panel. How does that sound?
Yeah, Katter, do you want to take this last one?
Yeah, I can take that one. One good question is, what is your overall process for designing and developing a new biome? This is actually, I really like this question because we were almost thinking of making an entire panel just on that question. There are so many things that can be taken into account. Personally, I have not been creating as many biomes as Terralith used to back in the day, but one thing we look at is what's missing, what functionality. Sometimes Starmute would mess around with Worldgen a lot, and he would see this new technique, and it's wondering, I wonder how this could be used. Or the other day, about a month ago, Apollo found this cool tech for creating very dynamic custom trees. And so it got me thinking, what could I use these custom trees for? What biome would look really good? Maybe a really unique spruce forest? But there's all these different ideas that can go. So sometimes, at least for me personally, it's kind of, how can we implement this cool feature? There are some other things that's kind of like, hey, I already have biomes. What would fit well with this other biome? And this one is not as fun of an answer, but sometimes it's a technical question. A lot of interliths, a lot of biomes were created because, hey, we have this hot biome and we have 3 cold biomes, but we have no way to transition it between the cold and the hot biome. So we need a good in-between biome to be able to generate in between them. There's a lot of things to work on, and sometimes just for fun. Whale, our structure artist, he loves to create a ton of mock-ups. Right now he has this cool idea for bringing back a really old biome that we had in Terralith that got removed, called the Crystal Caves. And so he's drawn a lot of concept art, and I think some of it might be shared in the Terralith Discord. Can't remember if he shared it publicly or not. If not, then if this is not public knowledge, there you go, little sneak peek. But lots of concept art and experimenting with different things, and of course, we're limited by features and all that.
Yeah, great job, the panelists. I want to issue a huge round of applause to this panel. A really, really great one, and amazing job, you guys. You should really feel proud of yourselves. Yeah, and thank you all for coming. The next panel, it will be tomorrow. What is that called exactly? Let's have a look. Next panel will be problem solving in Minecraft by Mr. Penguin. And until then, as always, there's plenty to do in the world. And to mention specifically, we have these 3 panelists right here. All have their own booths. Maybe you guys want to tell them what they're called and where they are?
Yeah, you can find my New in Town booth at to the east of Spawn. It is just across the trolley from Data Pack Hub. It's mostly focused on my base New in Town pack, so not a lot of world gen there. But if you want to hop into the New in Town forum thread as well, I'm happy to answer specific questions about that.
And Katter?
We have the Stardust Labs data pack, which is a place for all of our world gen data packs. And if you want the stamp for our booth, you go to the top floor and jump through the painting, and that's where we have a little showcase of Terralith and some of the structures we use both in Terralith and in Structure.
And Jacob?
So I have a panel about all my Worldgen tools. You can find it in the Aspen Forest, basically just over the river from the beach stage. So yeah, small showcase of Snowcapped, and a data pack map and a couple other tools that we haven't actually mentioned today. So yeah, if you want to check it out, come over there.
Yeah, and with that, we'll wrap things up. Thank you all for coming, and have a great day for the rest of the summit here. I sure will.
Thank
all
you,
right.
Karis, and thank you, everybody.
We'll
Yeah,
be able to
special
wrap
thanks.
up.
Yeah, special thanks to the
Discord.
summit staff for making this possible and the entire thing and moderating our panel.
Yeah, good job. Do we want to close the Discord event, and we might be able to find these people, the panelists, around in different voice chats or roaming around the world? So feel free to interact with them more.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.